Good morning and welcome back to Mojospresso, a caffeine-inspired shot of inspiration and perspective to help you on your journey with the goal to win the morning and win the day. Okay, so to this month's theme, which is all around distractions. And as we've said a number of times, since COVID, we've never seen the human race so distracted as it is right now. And these distractions are having massive consequences in three specific areas of our lives: our connection to people, our ability to prioritize our time, and our ability to be present. When we're distracted, they're the three biggest losers. Yeah, the ones we love the most in terms of people, the most important things in your life in terms of priorities, and the only place where happiness actually lives, right? The present moment. Okay, so I want to start this Mojospresso with a question for you. If this was the last day on the planet because a comet was heading this way, how would you spend it? Right? Seriously, what would you do? Right? Finality brings clarity sometimes. Like, would you lie in bed and pick up your phone and go on news media or social media for a numbing number of hours of doom scrolling? Would you obsess your work and head in to see just how much you could get done that day? Right? Would you obsess the future and worry about things that haven't happened yet? Or would you moan the past with that shoulda, coulda, woulda and beat yourself up about a mistake you might have made? Would you spend the day obsessing what others think of you or say about you? Would you sit with your family or friends, but then check notifications every time they pop up? Seriously, I'm curious, what would you do? Would you do those things? Or would you do something else if this was your last day on earth? Your answer to this question goes some of the way to answering where you might just be distracted right now. So the goal for this episode is to ask yourself, okay, what is my flavor of distraction? Because they're different for all of us, right? But if we don't identify our flavor of distraction, we don't know how to fix it. The first step to fixing any problem is acknowledging you have one. Right? If someone throws mud over your entire windscreen on your car while you're driving it, there's thousands of things could go wrong, from avoiding a crash to getting lost to running late. But really, the first thing you've got to do is clean the windscreen, right? So where's your mud? Where are your blind spots? Now, the Oxford Dictionary definition of distraction is a thing that prevents us from concentrating on something else, right? Or extreme agitation of the mind. And while everyone typically reverts to technology platforms and our brain's inability to cope causing distraction, which is true, by the way, I feel like there's also this perfect storm brewing, and it's been brewing for a while, around uncontrollables, around unhealthy habits, and around unconditional love, right? Let's call this the three uns. In terms of uncontrollables, some of our biggest distractions are quite simply caused by focusing on things we can't control, but wanting to control them. And our inability to identify, acknowledge, accept, and let go of these uncontrollables means we inevitably focus on them, which causes anxiety, stress, pressure, or worry. So write down on a piece of paper and list out your uncontrollables. So at the very least, you can identify them. But for so many of us, it's also this slow buildup of unhealthy habits that we're also not acknowledging, or we might be acknowledging them, but we're not addressing them, which means we're actually living our lives with excuses and in denial and kind of rationalizing our lives away. But worse than that, we're simply not prioritizing what really matters, right? So any road will take us anywhere. So maybe also list out your unhealthy habits. And by the way, all these exercises can be done in our mindset course, right? But everyone in the world lives and dies on the success of three things: how we think, what we prioritize, and the decisions that we make. And if we can challenge how we think, we'll challenge what we prioritize and what's really important. Which actually reminds me of a beautiful story of an Italian man whose name was Vilfredo Pareto, who back in 1906 was strolling through his garden, and he noticed that every year 20% of the pea plants produced 80% of the peas, right? He was also an economist. So this got him thinking about our output on a larger scale. And sure enough, he began to find that in various industries or societies or even companies, 80% of the production often came from only 20% of the most productive portion. This became known as the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule, which basically states that 80% of our output comes from 20% of the input or action. Right? So getting back to priorities. Many years later, Gary Keller wrote a stunningly simple book called The One Thing, and asked this simple but profound question. What's the one thing I can do right now such that by doing it, everything else becomes easier or unnecessary? Right? And by the way, I highly recommend that book, The One Thing. Okay, but let's talk about unconditional love, because even just understanding what that means is pretty important right now, because the biggest distraction on the planet right now for me, which is also killing the world in our opinion, is not believing that we're enough, unconditionally. So we put conditions on our self-worth with that, when I do that, then I'll be enough, which means we need to go external constantly for this external validation. We're getting distracted by going external rather than internal, and obsessing what others think about us rather than what we think about ourselves. And these imaginary or unrealistic expectations of others are distracting us from living a life true to ourselves. Right now we want others to give us what we're not prepared to give ourselves. Unconditional love. Will someone else please acknowledge me? Will someone else please recognize me or accept me or love me? And all these distractions do is put limitations or conditions on our self-worth, believing we have to do something or achieve something in order to be someone. And in doing so, we're never enough or at peace. We're all getting distracted by this human doingness. Yeah, we live in a society that believes if we do more, we will be more. So we're all diving full bore into this productivity, technology-based revolution with all these techie ways to help us do more and stay busy, busy, busy. Right? We can confidently have written on our gravestone, at least my inbox was empty. And if we can't identify this distraction and learn to go inwards and celebrate our imperfections and love ourselves unconditionally, we'll continue to put conditions on our happiness with that when-then kind of distraction. And this is where it's really important to note that it's not technology that is the issue. It's our perspective. And with that, technology just exacerbates these distractions where we replace human connection with tech connection, because it's easier to numb ourselves and escape into tech-based hiding places that confront the brutal facts of our reality, that we actually don't like spending time with ourselves. It's the difference between being alone and being lonely. You can be with another person and feel lonely, but you can be with yourself and not actually feel alone if you celebrate yourself first and don't get distracted by going external and getting caught up in FOPO, the fear of other people's opinions. Of all the distractions we're experiencing right now, one of the most pronounced ones is our inability to just be present. Almost every negative emotion we have is a consequence of either focusing on the past, which we can't control, or focusing on the future, which we also can't control. There's a beautiful quote that says, yesterday's history and tomorrow's a mystery, but today's a gift, and that's why it's called the present. When we're not present, our minds tend to completely take over. And this is where fear, ego, and time also take over. If we can't get back into the present moment, we're forever distracted. And we either work our way back or we numb it and we escape into hiding places like this technology or keeping busy, right? Which only creates more distractions. The reason the mindfulness and meditation industries have quadrupled in the last few years is simply because we're not staying here in the now. And if we can't simply stop and breathe through our bellies, and you can Google box breathing if you like, and listen to our surroundings, maybe touch something as well, and smile and be present, we'll constantly be distracted and we will suffer. As the great Alan Watts once said, stop measuring days by degree of productivity and start experiencing them by degree of presence. So maybe just ask yourself, how many times have I been truly present today? measure success that way. Doing anything well, however, and actually enjoying it means giving dedicated attention to one thing at a time. So whenever you hear the word multitask, think stupid or distraction, because you literally can't do two important things at the same time. You literally can't concentrate on two things at once. What we're really doing in moments of supposed multitasking is we're juggling, right? Mentally switching back and forth so fast, and we don't notice because our brains smooth over and reconfigure it over and over again to create this seamless experience. And the cost of all this is exhaustion or feeling overwhelmed, right? And it takes time, which is why our performance slows down in the process, often without us even noticing how ineffective we've actually become. The researcher and author Bridget Schultz calls this multitasking phenomenon time confetti. Right? Little bits of seconds and minutes lost to unproductive multitasking. Each bit alone seems harmless, but collectively, it's just so detrimental to not only our health, but our ability to prioritize. So maybe practice compassion in the face of multitasking. Cut yourself some slack and remind yourself, I can only do one thing at a time. And then apply that compassion to others, right? Because they're only human as well. But let's just come back for a sec to the biggest distractions on the planet. So if you've ever watched a crime show, I don't know, CSI or Law and Order, you've probably heard of a post-mortem, yeah? But have you ever heard of a pre-mortem, where we actually predict where we might go off the rails or which distractions might prevent us from living our greatest and most authentic lives? One of the most amazing books I've ever read on distraction was actually written by an Australian nurse for the dying, Bronnie Ware, who dedicated her life to palliative care and spending time with people in the final stages of life. And she was so frustrated by the same distractions being called out by folk who no longer had an opportunity to do something about it, that she wrote a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And as I call these out, maybe see which ones might be a little bit relevant to you so you can identify where your distraction might be. Okay, the fifth most frequent deathbed regret was, I wish I had let myself be happier. If this is you, what's causing this distraction? Is it negativity of media or others, or just not finding the good? Yeah. Am I listening to my inner critic or my inner fan? Am I getting distracted by FOPO? Yeah. The number 4 deathbed regret is, I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. Right? Are we prioritizing meetings over mates, thinking that they'll always be there one day and I'll just prioritize them kind of later on in life? Right? Are we even prioritizing our most important relationships? Or we're no longer being selective because we want to be liked by everyone, so we've now got this kind of scattergun approach. Number 3 deathbed regret is, I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. Right? Are we distracted by seeing vulnerability as a weakness? So we're not actually standing in our truth or telling people we love them, or just how we actually really feel. Humans are emotional beings, and if we deny our emotions, we deny our whole sense of being, and we deny the opportunity to be kind to ourselves and kind to someone else. Okay, the number 2 deathbed regret is, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Right? Quite simply, we're distracted by being a human doing, not a human being, thinking that money and status are better than relationships and memories and experiences. And finally, the number 1 and saddest deathbed regret of all is, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. There's that word again, expectations of others. The number 1 deathbed regret, distracted by others' expectations of me, rather than having the courage to be me, to be true to me, and focus only on the expectations I put on myself. And therefore I can follow my dreams and my goals and my hero's journey. Okay, so there you have it. Some of the various forms of distractions and some of the questions we can start to ask ourselves to start reframing our approach to those distractions. And lastly, if you're like the rest of us and you're feeling so overwhelmed right now with so many distractions that we actually don't know where to start, simply stop and breathe and smile and be present and go small. Go really, really, really small, because our brains can't consume the overwhelming distractions on the planet right now. So get present and savor it. If you're having a coffee, have small sips. And if you're doing something, take small steps. Yeah, small sips and small steps. Make that your mantra for the day, and then see what happens. So with that, I will love you and leave you and see you on the other side in the soup.